I had exactly $14,206 in my business account, 37 staples in my abdomen, and a yellow USB drive my 8-year-old son pressed into my palm while whispering, "They come when you leave." 11 days earlier, while I was flat on my back in Charlotte recovering from emergency surgery and still sleeping in my late wife's t-shirts because grief does strange things to a grown man, someone moved $612,400 out of the housing trust Emma built before she died. By the time I realized it, her brother had already filed paperwork to remove me as guardian of our son's inheritance and transfer our house into an LLC I had never heard of. The USB felt almost weightless. The threat behind it did not. What saved me in the end was not anger. It was metadata, a canary clause buried in an irrevocable trust, and one person in the wrong room who finally decided she was done lying for the right family. Let me take you back. My son's name is Milo. He was 7 when Emma died and 8 when he learned to listen for the side gate. That detail mattered later. At first, all I knew was that he had stopped asking to go to baseball practice on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Those were the days I went into the office for 2 hours to keep my forensic accounting firm from collapsing. I had cut my schedule to almost nothing after the surgery, but I still had payroll, clients, insurance, the dull machinery of adult life that does not pause just because your wife's favorite coffee mug is still on the shelf and your son has started sleeping with the hallway light on. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Milo would stand near the door and ask, "How long?" Not, "Where are you going?" Not, "Can I come?" Just, "How long?" I told myself it was separation anxiety. Kids measure loss differently. They count departures. They remember which goodbyes turned permanent. Then one Thursday, as I was reaching for my car keys, he grabbed my wrist so hard it hurt and said, "Please don't leave today. They come when you leave." I crouched down too fast and pulled at my stitches. I remember the sharp pain. I remember pretending I was fine. "Who comes?" I asked. He looked toward the kitchen window. "That man with Uncle Dane. And Nana Colleen. Sometimes the lady with the red nails. They tell me not to bother you because you're sick and confused." My son did not cry often. Emma used to say he saved it up like a miser. But that day his eyes filled without warning. "They go in Mom's office," he said. "They told me if I told you, you might lose the house because you signed things wrong now." I put the keys back on the table. Then I waited. There is a sentence people say when they want to sound helpful while they are quietly robbing you. It is this: "Let's keep things simple." My brother-in-law, Dane Mercer, had been saying it for months. Dane was 43, handsome in the polished, expensive way of men who never apologize because the world keeps mistaking confidence for character. He ran donor relations for a private hospital foundation and had spent most of his adult life being introduced as the smart one, the charming one, the one who could get things done. Emma used to laugh at that phrase. It means he makes a mess and hands someone else a mop. Emma was the younger sibling, also the useful one. When their father, Walter Mercer, got sick 3 years before Emma died, she handled his medications, his appointments, his legal paperwork, and the endless arguments with insurance. Dane flew in for photographs, posted sentimental captions, and left early for meetings that never seemed to exist. At Walter's funeral, Colleen Mercer stood in my kitchen, looked straight at Emma while she was washing dishes from her own father's wake, and said, "You've always been the steady child. Dane has a public-facing job. He can't be expected to carry all this." That was incident 1. Emma put the dish towel down, smiled with all her teeth, and said, "Then stop expecting me to carry him." Colleen did not speak to her for 3 weeks. Incident 2 came 6 months later, when Walter's estate attorney came over to review the irrevocable trust he had funded for Milo, and a small housing initiative Emma had launched in memory of a teacher who once took her in during a bad season at home. Dane wanted discretionary control. Walter refused. Colleen, calm as glass, looked at me across the dining room table and said, "I still don't understand why an outsider needs to sit in on family matters." Emma answered before I could. "He's not an outsider," she said. "He's my husband." Colleen took a sip of tea and said, "Legally." That was how they did it. Never loud, never sloppy, calm cruelty in clean clothes. Emma died 9 months later when a pickup crossed the median on I-77 in rain thick enough to erase the road. There are losses so large that afterward other people's bad behavior almost looks small. That was my mistake. I thought grief had pushed family politics to the edge of the map. I was wrong. It had simply made me slower to see the route they were taking. After the surgery, I was easier prey. I had developed a bowel obstruction from scar tissue that nobody expected. One minute, I was trying to pack Milo's lunch. The next, I was in the ER signing consent forms with a nurse pointing where to initial because I could barely focus. Dane showed up at the hospital in a navy blazer and concern you could have framed. "You need to rest," he said. "I'll handle anything administrative." I should have said no. Instead, because I was exhausted and because I had spent the last year trying not to become the suspicious widower who sees schemes everywhere, I gave him limited access to the office files related to Emma's housing trust. Not my personal accounts, not the guardianship documents, just the trust folder. That was enough. The Monday after Milo whispered in the kitchen, I called the bank that held the trust operating account. The compliance officer sounded uncomfortable before she sounded helpful. "There was an authorized transfer," she said. 2 wires, same day. Total of $612,400, sent to Crescent Harbor Renovations, LLC. "I didn't authorize that. It appears to have your e-signature attached. I asked for the authorization packet. She sent it while we were on the phone. My signature was there. My initials too. Neat. Precise. Impossible. I had been in a hospital bed vomiting into a plastic basin at the timestamp shown on page 1. That was when my estate litigator, Pilar Soto, called me back. Pilar had represented one of my clients in a probate fight, so ugly it ended with 3 siblings speaking through counsel over a set of antique lamps. She was short, exact, and impossible to charm. I liked her immediately for that. I forwarded the packet. She read in silence. Then she said, "Aaron, there's an emergency board vote Thursday night at the Mercer Family Housing Gala. They're using this transfer as evidence of mismanagement. Friday morning, they'll ask probate court to suspend you as guardian administrator over Milo's beneficial interest. If you miss this, you lose everything." There it was. The line nobody says by accident. "If I miss this, I lose everything." I repeated. "Yes," Pilar said. "Your standing, access to the trust records, likely temporary control of the house. Maybe worse if they claim diminished capacity because of this surgery and medication. Stop talking to the Mercers directly. Save every message. We start now." I hung up and went into Emma's old office. The room still smelled faintly like cedar pencils and her hand lotion. There were 3 banker boxes in the closet. Dane and Colleen had apparently been in a hurry because they had left one drawer unlocked. The first folder gave me fake invoices from Crescent Harbor Renovations. Roof work, accessibility updates, environmental remediation. None of it had been done. I knew because I could see our actual roof from the window, and it was still missing the same 3 shingles from a storm in April. The second folder changed everything. Inside it were draft deeds and signed affidavits, and a board memo recommending that the Mercer family home where Milo and I lived be temporarily conveyed into a property management entity pending fiduciary stabilization. In normal English, they planned to take the house, call it administrative, and dare me to fund a fight while recovering from surgery and raising a grieving child. Tucked behind the memo was a sticky note in blocky handwriting. "Ask Nina to reprint with old footer. Use Emma file." Nina was Dane's executive assistant. I took pictures of everything. Then Milo came into the office and held out the yellow USB. I took it from Uncle Dane's bag. He whispered, already ashamed. "I know I'm not supposed to." I looked at him for a long second. "You're not in trouble," I said. That mattered too. The USB contained what looked, at first, like nothing useful. A donor presentation, a scanned copy of Walter Mercer's original trust schedule, and a folder labeled Gallant for final. I almost missed the Properties tab because I was tired. The video file metadata showed it had been exported from Dane's laptop 2 nights earlier using a legacy signature image file labeled Emma_2019.png. The same image file name appeared in the PDF properties of the bank authorization I had just received. He had not forged my signature from scratch. He had built a document set using archived family signatures, including Emma's, and likely a digital packet he pulled while I was hospitalized. Pilar was quiet for once when I sent it over. Then she said, "Good. Now we have a theory. A theory doesn't save my house." "No," she said, "but a forensic audit, a sworn affidavit, and a temporary asset freeze might." That afternoon, another problem arrived. Dane texted me. "We need to keep this private for Milo's sake." I did not answer. 3 minutes later, Mom is heartbroken. She thinks the pain meds are affecting your judgment. Then, if you insist on making this ugly, we'll do what's necessary. An hour after that, a process server rang my bell. Colleen Mercer had filed for emergency grandparent visitation and requested a temporary restraining order preventing me from interfering with family contact or disposing of trust-related property. That was the humiliation threat, public, polished, and designed to make me sound unstable. I put the papers face down. Then I called Pilar back. She arrived with a contract forensic examiner named Ravi Bod and a notary named Denise Holloway, who had worked for Walter Mercer's estate years before. Denise was in her 60s, wore running shoes with her suit, and had the alert expression of someone who had spent a career noticing what other people hoped she would miss. Ravi explained the basics in my dining room while Milo did homework in the den. A forged deed doesn't have to look fake, he said. It has to survive casual review. Metadata tells us what created it, when it was modified, and whether signature images were pasted rather than executed through a normal workflow. Think of it as fingerprints left by software. Pilar opened Walter's trust instrument and tapped a paragraph I had forgotten existed. This, she said, is a fraud carve-out wrapped inside what's effectively a canary clause. Walter was smarter than his family gave him credit for. If any trustee or advisor attempts to dilute the minor beneficiary's interest using a related party entity, undisclosed LLC shell, or false conveyance document, they automatically forfeit compensation and trigger independent fiduciary review. A canary clause, I said. Right. It sits there quietly until someone poisons the room. For the first time in days, I breathed all the way in. This isn't revenge, I said. This is justice. Pilar nodded once. Good. Keep that sentence. You may need it later. By Wednesday morning, we had enough for triage. Ravi produced a preliminary forensic audit tying Crescent Harbor Renovations LLC to Dane through a registered agent change and a mailing address that matched a condo he used for client events. Denise signed an affidavit stating Walter had explicitly excluded Dane from unilateral control because, in Walter's words, he confuses access with ownership. We also had the USB metadata, screenshots of the fake invoices, and a timeline showing I could not have authorized the wire transfers from a post-op bed with no device access. What we did not have was motive strong enough to crack the room open in public. That arrived from the last person I expected. At 5:12 p.m. Wednesday, I got a call from an unknown number. A woman said, "Mr. Vale, this is Nina, Dane's assistant. I need 10 minutes, and I can't be seen at your house." We met in the parking lot of a Harris Teeter under a flickering lamp that made everything look temporarily criminal. Nina was younger than I expected, early 30s, smart eyes, red nails, just like Milo had said. She handed me a manila envelope and did not sit down. "I'm not doing this for you," she said. "I'm doing it because he used my login." Inside were printer logs, draft board emails, and a voice memo Nina had recorded after Dane dictated instructions for backdating the footer so it aligns with Emma's old file set. There was also a scanned email from Colleen to Dane with one sentence highlighted. "If Aaron resists, use the surgery. No judge wants a medicated widower managing real property." I looked up. "Why now?" Nina swallowed. "Because your son asked me if his dad was going to get sent away because of the papers. He thought I was nice. I wasn't. I stayed too long." Ally identity twist. I did not know that phrase then. I only knew what it felt like when one person inside the machine finally refused to keep it running. Pilar filed motions that night for an emergency asset freeze, expedited discovery, and sanctions for attempted fraudulent conveyance. She also sent a preservation notice to Dane, Colleen, the foundation board, and the bank. Thursday evening arrived humid and bright, the sort of southern spring night that makes expensive people feel immortal. The Mercer Family Housing Gala was held at the Mint Museum uptown. Emma had built that event from scratch when it was just folding chairs and a donor slideshow in a church gym. Now it had valet parking, brushed brass signage, and a string quartet near the stairs. I wore a dark suit because grief had taught me that sometimes the cleanest form of defiance is simply showing up pressed and on time. Dane saw me first. His smile did not reach his eyes. "Aaron," he said, shaking my hand as if cameras might be watching. "You really should be home resting." Colleen drifted beside him in cream silk and old money composure. We all want what's best for Milo, she said. That was the smallest reveal. The dramatic irony. They still thought I was there to plead. I said, I'm sure tonight will be clarifying. At 7:40, Dane took the stage to speak about stewardship, legacy, and carrying forward Walter Mercer's vision. Behind him played photographs of smiling families in front of renovated homes funded by Emma's program. Then came the donor video from the USB. Halfway through, Pilar touched the AV tech on the elbow and handed him a court-stamped notice requiring preservation of all digital materials related to the trust. He looked at the notice, then at the board chair, then at Dane, and did the sensible thing. He stopped the video. The room shifted. Pilar walked to the front, calm as weather. I apologize for the interruption, she said. But because this event is being used to support a pending fiduciary action, attendees deserve accurate information. There were murmurs, chairs turning, phones lifting. Ravi displayed a side-by-side comparison on the screen. The donor video metadata, the bank transfer PDF metadata, the same archived signature file name, the same laptop device path, the same edited footer package. That was the bigger reveal. Dane laughed lightly, too lightly. This is a misunderstanding of export data. Ravi, who enjoyed being underestimated, clicked again. Up came the LLC records for Crescent Harbor renovations, the registered address, the banking transfer route, and the invoice trail leading back to a shell vendor list created on Dane's office computer. Then Nina stood up from table 14. I had not known she was coming. Pilar had. She raised her hand like someone answering a question in school and said, clear enough for the back of the room, it's not a misunderstanding. He told me to reprint the deed package with an old footer and said the widower would be too drugged to fight. If silence can have temperature, the room dropped 15 degrees. Colleen stood so quickly her chair tipped. You have no idea what you're saying, she snapped. Nina held up her phone. I recorded him. That was the nuclear reveal. Donors were already whispering. Board members were checking their own emails and texts. One of the hospital foundation directors I recognized from prior audits walked straight out to make a call. Later I learned it was to outside counsel. Dane turned to me then, all the polish gone. You're doing this here? I said, you started it in private because you thought no one would stop you. Security did not escort him out. That would have been theatrical. Worse happened. The board chair took the microphone, announced the gala would be suspended pending legal review, and stated that no further funds would be dispersed until independent counsel completed an investigation. Revenge is never loud. Revenge is order. By 9:22, the bank had confirmed it was placing an internal hold on the remaining trust accounts based on the pending motion and apparent fraud indicators. By 10, one of Dane's biggest donors had texted him in front of 3 witnesses. Do not contact me until this is resolved. He read it. I watched his face change. Friday morning, probate court smelled like old paper and coffee that had given up. Dane arrived with counsel and the brittle confidence of someone still not fully accepting that paper trails are real. Colleen wore gray. She looked less like a matriarch and more like someone discovering that control is not the same thing as safety. Pilar moved first. Asset freeze. Temporary suspension of Mercer-appointed trustees. Preservation order. Bar on contact with Milo outside supervised channels. Sanctions for attempted fraudulent conveyance and misrepresentation to the court. Dane's attorney argued grief, confusion, regrettable optics, overstatement. Then Ravi testified about the forensic audit. Denise testified about Walter's instructions. Nina testified under subpoena and read from the email where Colleen advised using my surgery against me. Pilar explained the canary clause in plain English for the judge. Walter Mercer had anticipated exactly this kind of related party theft and built a self-executing penalty into the trust instrument. Then the judge reviewed the draft deed, the metadata report, and the wire packet. The courtroom went silent. It was not dramatic in the movie sense. No one gasped. No one stood up. It was the quieter kind of silence that comes when every person present realizes the lie has lost its scaffolding. The judge folded his hands and said, "This court is not interested in family mythology. It is interested in records. On this record, there is sufficient evidence of attempted self-dealing, fraudulent documentation, and potential abuse of fiduciary authority." He granted the asset freeze. He suspended Colleen and Dane from all trust-related roles. He denied the grandparent visitation petition without prejudice and entered a temporary restraining order barring direct or indirect contact with Milo pending further review. Then he referred the matter to the district attorney's financial crimes unit. Dane actually turned to me as we stood to leave and said, in a low voice, "You're blowing up your son's family." I answered him quietly, "No, I'm protecting the one he has left." The criminal case took months, because real consequences usually do. There were depositions, supplemental affidavits, subpoena fights, and one especially satisfying day when a second forensic audit found that Dane had routed donor reimbursements through 2 more shell companies and falsified escrow dispute documentation on a separate property transfer. That widened everything. More records, more questions, less room for denial. Colleen never apologized. People like her often confuse apology with surrender. She did, however, lose almost everything she had tried to protect. The court enforced the canary clause. Her trustee compensation was forfeited. Dane's share of the administrative distributions vanished. The foundation board removed both of them and voted to appoint an independent fiduciary. The house stayed in trust for Milo exactly as Walter and Emma intended. The $612,400 was traced, clawed back in part, and the remainder became the subject of a restitution order after Dane accepted a plea that kept him out of a trial he would have lost. Nina got another job within 2 weeks. Pilar sent her flowers. Ravi sent her a mechanical keyboard. I sent her a note that said only, "You changed the outcome." Milo stopped listening for the side gate by the end of that summer. That may sound small to people who have never watched a child decide. Slowly, that home is home again. It was not small. 1 year later, I had a different kitchen table, a healthier scar, and a calendar that no longer terrified me. Milo was playing fall baseball again. I had shifted my practice almost entirely toward forensic work in probate and fiduciary fraud cases, plus a growing number of pro bono guardianship matters for families who did not have the money to fight polished lies. Emma's housing initiative still existed, now under independent oversight, and its annual gala had become something simpler and better. Fewer speeches, more actual houses. Colleen lived in a townhouse outside Asheville and communicated through lawyers when she communicated at all. Dane was on supervised release, professionally finished in every room that had once mattered to him. No dramatic ruin, just the long, adult consequence of being documented accurately. That felt right. Some nights I still think about how close they came. Not to taking the money. Money can be traced. Houses can be fought over. Accounts can be frozen. What they nearly took was harder to name. Confidence. Routine. A child's trust that adults mean what they say when they call a place safe. That is why I tell this story the way I do. Not because I enjoy the fall of people who thought they were untouchable, though I won't pretend I lost sleep over it. I tell it because boundaries are not cruelty. Documentation is not paranoia. And when someone keeps asking you to keep it simple, it is worth checking whether simple only benefits them. The other day, Milo tossed a baseball at my chest while I was carrying groceries and said, "You still catch slow." I told him I was carrying dinner. He said that sounded like an excuse Emma would have rejected. He was right. So I put the bags down, picked up the ball, and threw it back. If you've ever had that moment where your gut knew something before the paperwork proved it, you already understand this story better than most. Tell me what detail tipped you off first. And if you want more long-form stories where quiet people stop being easy targets and let the documents speak, subscribe.